to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Some would say that that history of 70 years may have made a bit of a mockery of that promise, though in fact there has been no major power war in that period. And since the phase out of the Cold War, which I would date to the 1987 agreement among the permanent members of the Security Council to help force a shutdown of the long-running war between Iran and Iraq, that since that moment, the United Nations has developed capabilities that those 5 permanent members and the other members of the Security Council have been able to collaborate on in shutting down conflicts rather than, as they often did during the Cold War, incite them, prolong them, and inflame them. The events of the past year involving an extremist jihadist group that got its start in the rebellion against Syria's government and then spread into Iraq takes us, in a sense, full circle back to the moment when the UN security machinery finally began to work the way it had been intended to, back to Iraq. And for Americans, it's back to Iraq after not just 1987, the Iran-Iraq War, but the 1990-91, a quarter century ago, Kuwait War, back to the American invasion of Iraq, 2003, and President Obama's much hoped for complete disengagement just 4 years ago. So we thought. But also 4 years ago, we had the beginning of what was very facilely called Arab Spring, series of uprisings that spread like a contagion through much of the Arab world: Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, Syria, and then with the Syrian civil war metastasizing with Daesh, with the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, the Levant, back to Iraq. So we have assembled most of our panel here. I got a call just before we came on from Ambassador Boukadoum's office saying he is caught in a meeting and he will send someone over, inshallah. But we will start with the fabulous panel we have. I mean, Algeria would be great because it is the one major country in the Arab world that has not been meddling in its neighbors' internal affairs, has not been involved in one side or another in some of the strife that has flowed from the Arab Spring. But we also have from across the Mediterranean the permanent representative of Italy, which is the country that has been in the front lines for Europe, for the West more generally, as the Arab world has gone through its political convulsions, its political transitions, and in particular with Libya, with a level of chaos that has opened the floodgates to a movement of desperate people across the Mediterranean, and it has been the Italians who had stepped up to the plate in trying to actually help migrants instead of sinking their boats. And our other commentator in this panel, Ambassador Maureen Quinn, who had been U.S. Ambassador in Qatar, one of those Arab countries that has, how should we put it, sought to increase its influence in a fraternal, meddling way, and has served as well in Morocco, in Afghanistan, across much of the Arab world, representing the United States. So let me turn first to Ambassador Cardi. While France, Britain, and some others in Washington circles, let's say, led the drumbeat for international intervention in Libya 4 years ago, the Italian government was markedly cautious. A participant, was the only one of the big NATO countries to call for a ceasefire between Gaddafi and the rebels, which the other NATO power said, no ceasefire until Gaddafi is gone. And with that being ignored, Libya now is a disaster. What can Italy, what can the European Union do now to help the United Nations mediator who is trying to stitch together a deal among all of these armed and some unarmed factions in Libya to put that Libyan Humpty Dumpty back together again. And even if that mediator, Bernardino Leon, could stitch together a political agreement, what country in its right mind would want to contribute troops to a UN peacekeeping force in this cauldron to help guarantee the deal?
Thank you, Jeff. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that Sabri, the colleague from Algeria, is not here. Of course, I would have felt much more, strengthened, my diplomatic, speech. But I'm an ambassador. I'm not a scholar. You are an ambassador too, but you are also a scholar. I'm simply an ambassador. So normally ambassadors, they don't know nothing. They don't want to speak, and when they speak, they say the contrary of what they think, because it's. But this time, I'll try to be a little bit more honest. But also, I must advise everybody that it's the panel is very timely in a way, and your question is very timely because we've been knowing each other for a long time. Because I was here in the 90s in the UN for 5 years as a counselor. It's very timely because the situation, of course, is degrading rapidly. It's really very difficult, and these very days, by the way, at 4:30, I should be at the mission for another meeting that we are holding on these topics, especially on Libya, which is the topic of the day, of course. The situation is really very difficult. As you said, Italy and European Union are facing a crisis in the Mediterranean. But I would like to say also not only in the Mediterranean, because it's not only Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan that are a little bit more far away countries, but still connected to this big crisis area, but also in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel. There's been in the last few years a change in the characteristic of the crisis. It's not anymore only national problems that have to be addressed by the UN, by the international community. Now we are seeing a more general trend, which is, of course, we have reminded that terrorism, violent extremism taking hold in some of these countries, and the latest development, of course, is the ISIL or Daesh, stronghold in Libya, which, of course, is very worrisome for everybody, and for Italy and for European Union especially, and from the neighboring countries. Should not forget them: Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, because they are so close to the European Union borders and to our shores. The UN, you said, is 17, and it's doing a great job. I always say to the people that I meet, and there is a lot of skepticism around the world about what the UN can achieve. It's always been like that. It's like that in Italy. It's like that in many European countries, in the United States, of course. But the UN, you cannot measure the UN achievements by months or weeks or even years. You have to to measure them over the decades. And without the UN, the world would still be a very, very worse place than it is today. Many instances. Think about human rights. Italy has been a champion here at the UN of human rights promotion, human rights advocacy, and over the years, the UN has done so much to advance the rights of the women, of the children in conflict. One issue, such as the death penalty, on which Italy is really at the forefront of the battle here at the UN. So I think it has to be seen as an effort of the international community to provide itself with a forum where everybody can talk to everybody, and where we every day, through a lot of meetings, I can tell sometimes you can see my face, it's much worse than today. We start at 9 o'clock and we finish maybe at 10 o'clock in the evening, and we have very long meetings. And we discuss maybe even details, on resolutions and documents, but all of that will one day produce, and even sometime very soon, very rapidly, produce results. But you can look at the world how it was in 45, and you have to look at the world today. Now, today, of course, as you said, and we go back to the issue of Mediterranean crisis, we are facing really some big disruptions. Italy is at the forefront, the European Union also, but Italy especially. And we have been trying to address the issue of, refugees. I mean, refugees coming from poverty, violence, conflict, women, children. So we have to address the root causes, but we have to be able, as civilized world, in cooperation with our neighbors in the Mediterranean, to address this issue of the immigrants and refugees. So Italy has been doing a lot. We have established 2 years ago an operation in the Mediterranean after so many deaths, so many terrible, tragedies in the sea. These people, packing the small boats, with people. Women aboard, pregnant women, small children. And we've been trying to address that. And I think that the Italian Navy has been doing a great job. I think we were able to rescue more than 100,000 people over the last 16 months. Now, European Union, we have been requesting European Union to step up its efforts to try to help, in rescuing these people, not sinking them, as you said. And the European Union has replaced the Triton operation has replaced the Mare Nostrum, which was an Italian-led operation. And there's been a strong increase in the influx, even during the winter, which is strange. Normally, the refugees influx was during spring or summer, which is of course the best condition for at sea. There's been an increase, and we have seen December, January, February months in which there has been an increase in flows. So that attests to the deterioration of the situation in many parts of the Mediterranean. And we have an objective responsibility to do something, and we are trying to do it. Now, the Libya, and you refer to that, and I'm not going to be able to talk a lot about that, because really in these moments the UN, the United Nations, are trying, with the support of Italian and other countries, many other countries, to support, to broker a ceasefire, to broker an agreement between the parties in Libya that would create the condition for the international community, the UN first, to be able to help this country, which is an important country in the Mediterranean, a rich country, to stabilize again and to be a stabilizing factor in the region. So this is a very interesting test case. Now we have chaos, a situation of civil war, two parties, fighting each other, and the terrorist element taking advantage of this weakness and taking a stronghold on some parts of Libya, and killing people like the 21 Egyptian Christian Copts. So the mediation of the UN is the main element of this equation in this moment. Bernardino Leon, the Spanish diplomat, is trying right now. He will try again in the next few days to address the situation. And if he's successful, as we all hope, it will be possible for the Security Council and the international community and countries such as Italy and others, neighboring countries, to help Libya restore its stability and become, a stabilizing force. You mentioned UN peacekeeping. We are not there yet. UN peacekeeping is a very interesting case. There are more than 100,000 peacekeepers around the world right now. We think, that there is a panel. I don't want to talk too much about that, but there is a panel for the reform of the UN peacekeeping and the missions. We are going to give it our contribution. We think it is important that the UN peacekeeping is efficient. Peacekeeping must not only be a way to be present in a country, it also have to address a lot of issues, rule of law, institution building, civilian components, and so on. So we are going to try to give, during this year of anniversary of the UN, a new shape to the UN peacekeeping. And in turn, but I'm on Libya, I don't know, because we are going to see if there are the condition for some kind of presence, maybe not. It will have to be seen, and for the moment, this is what I can say on Libya, not more than that.
Well, thank you, Ambasciatore, and I'm sure folks may want to pick up on the diplomatic dodge when we get to our Q&A. Not dodge, excuse me, the diplomatic leaving a gray area to be worked out, which of course is what negotiations are all about. Now, Ambassador Quinn, at the time of the Libyan resolution, there had been, as the justification for the authorization for the international community to use military force to protect the lives of people who might be endangered, presumably by the then government in Libya, invocation of the new doctrine of responsibility to protect. And then some folks felt they were snookered when the other parts of the resolution were not carried out. And it has been strangely absent from discussions of what the UN might do on Syria. Is, as a practical matter, responsibility to protect dead as a functioning doctrine at the United Nations? Should anyone imagine that the Gulf monarchies, the Turkish government of Recep Erdogan, have been motivated by humanitarian considerations in their advocacy to bring down the Assad government in Syria? What do you see as the constellation of international interests outside of Syria in where that conflict goes and how it is settled?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jeff, for inviting me today. When the invitation came, you said, well, could you come, Maureen, and speak on this panel, and it's an honor to be here with Ambassador Carty and bring the think tank perspective to the issue. So I'm going to do some thinking out loud. I'm going to do some, in my office sometimes we talk about thinking and tanking, that's, but I'm very glad to make the contribution. So, now your question on responsibility to protect is really an important one. And I was really very happy when you asked me that question, because I can answer flat out from my perspective. I personally very much think it is wrong to think that the responsibility to protect as a concept is dead. And I have to be honest that if you had actually asked me that question maybe, I think it's about 18 months, almost 2 years ago, I might have answered it differently. I might have said, yeah, it's dead. Particularly, yes, there's particularly the responsibility to protect was severely tested by the two Security Council mandates passed February, March of 2011 around Libya. But I don't think it's dead, and I'm going to tell you first my personal anecdotal story, which changed my mind, and then some other reasons as well. It was about 18 months ago, I was at one of the workshops that my office put together, and we had a combination of participants. We had one professor, an expert, who was actually, I'll call him a expert practitioner. He had worked at the United Nations in one of the policy offices here, actually in the development of this concept of responsibility to protect. So he was one of our participants. And then we had two ambassadors, permanent representatives to the United Nations, like Ambassador Carty. One was from a smaller country that itself had gone through conflict, but happened to be representing their country on the council at the time of these votes. And another was another permanent representative, again, who was on the Security Council at the time of these votes from a large country from the Global South. All three people said, no, this concept is not dead, and it hasn't been fully developed. And, oh, by the way, member states, the UN system, academics are still working on it and looking at how do you use this concept for the kind of purposes that Jeffrey is talking about. How do we use this concept of the responsibility to protect to prevent atrocity, crimes against humanity, et cetera. So I think that too often the discussion, when you talk about responsibility to protect, the discussion all revolves around the issue of the use of force. And there are other pillars of the responsibility to protect that can be considered, just like there's other tools in the diplomatic toolbox to use in these situations other than just the use of force. So just to remind everyone, some of you may know this, you may be experts yourselves, the first pillar of the responsibility to protect is the pillar of sovereignty. And it's that the state carries the responsibility to protect its citizens from genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and their incitement. And I think that's actually, looking at that concept, that's a very important concept. And I have heard, that the Secretary General has special envoys, like you mentioned Mr. DeLone. Well, I heard one of those individuals talk about how he took this concept and he went into, in this case, the case he was talking about, it was with an African leader. And what he said was, he said to this leader, this is what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is your responsibility to protect your citizens from genocide, war crimes, et cetera. And so it was the use of this, and this is dialogue, this is diplomacy, that's important and was useful in the case that I'm referring to. The second pillar, of course, of the responsibility to protect is the responsibility of the international community to help the state in upholding its own responsibility. So now, of course, as I said, here at the United Nations or at the Security Council, a lot of the debates and the focus on them is when you're talking about the use of force. No, they talk about, the talks under Chapter 7. But I think it's worthwhile, particularly, and I'm coming from a think tank, let's take the time and let's look at the concept in its broader sense. Again, thinking and tanking is that I have a colleague. Okay, I'll be brief then. But I have an important point here to make about this, is that, I have a colleague who's looking at the issue of why does the United Nations, why does the system struggle so much on trying to prevent atrocities? There's a commitment there. There's the will. There is this concept of the responsibility to protect. But realistically, there are limitations on this that you have to talk about and think about if you want to use something like the concept of responsibility to protect. So first of all, what are some of the limitations, the obvious things? Many conflicts are not readily susceptible to outside mediation because one or more of the parties, they've gone down this path of atrocities. Secondly, prevention is about, the UN friends and neighbors, if they want to contribute, right? Prevention, however, of conflict, it's political, okay? And there's something called political will that comes into play. But again, thinking and tanking, you got to break down what that political will is. It's not just, it can be the geopolitical competition that Jeff was mentioning as far as with regards to the case of Syria, the multiple angles of the neighbors, the political powers, the geopolitical competition at the global level, the regional level. There's also the political will that goes back to your basic national interests, protecting your borders, your natural resources. But there's also the political will that's about the protecting of your own citizens and making the choices as a government about, okay, so what's the least bad choice that I have, that I'm going to make as a member state on an issue to protect the interests of my citizens and to advance those interests. So when we're talking about these issues and what gets in the way, say, of the member states or the system, the UN, the Security Council, particularly on these issues, is I could be a cynic because I've seen it fail. But I've also seen that it's possible. And I think so if you dig deeper, that things like political will, the limitations on outside force, uncertainty, that, when governments are you're making these choices, and I'd even go back to the 2011 or today, governments, member states, there's uncertainty. It's not black and white, these decisions. And with uncertainty comes risk. And I could go on, but I don't want to take up all the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Ambassador Cardi, do you have within 2 minutes, because 1 minute, even better, I'll mark it down. One.
Just to give an example, like the UN, related to the responsibility to protect, I mean, we are working very much with Special Envoy Dieng. He's working on a framework of analysis. It's a set of indicators that will help the international community on the ground and here in New York and in the capitals understand when there are, signs of violence, mass killings, genocide, genocide, and so on. So this is really very important. The second thing for your thought, we are talking about peacekeeping. You have to think about, peacekeeping budget at the UN is $8.5 billion. Mediation budget at the UN is like $100 million. We have to change that, I think.
In 40 seconds. I have 3 other questions to pose to the panel, and I'm going to ask on each of these just 2 minutes in terms of a reply. Maureen had spoken about Syria. Sebastiano, the UN mediator for Syria, half of Paisan, Staffan de Mistura, has been struggling to achieve local ceasefires in hopes of building confidence in a political process that could then end the war. Realistically, do you at this point see any of the Syrian sides close enough to exhaustion militarily that they're willing to compromise? And how do you get a Syrian settlement when a third of the country is controlled by a jihadist group, Daesh, that the UN Security Council, the entire international community, seeks to destroy, not to entice into a deal? Maybe 3 minutes on that.
Maybe 30 seconds, because if I knew the answer, I would be maybe, Secretary General of the UN or permanent member of the UN. It's very difficult to reply to this question. It's, of course, we have been struggling with the Syrian issue for quite some time now. There have been, I remember, not only Staffan de Mistura, who is half Italian and Swedish, but before him, Lakhdar Brahimi, a very experienced diplomat, and before him, Kofi Annan, another very experienced diplomat, trying to solve the puzzle in Syria. Now, the terrorist threat, the ISIL presence there is going to maybe change things a little bit. Now, we see a difficult equation there because there's still a regime in place, of course, and the opposition is not strong enough to revert things militarily or in other ways. So I think that the idea of Staffan de Mistura, which we certainly support, to broker some kind of ceasefires or freeze, as he called them, especially starting from cities such as Aleppo, an historical city which has been practically destroyed by the war. And we have to understand that the humanitarian, aspects of this war are becoming paramount, maybe even more than, and the humanitarian cultural aspects, even more than the political solution, which in a way is already freezed. Maybe because of this new threat by the terrorist extremists that we have to fight together with all the forces we have. I mean, and when I say all the forces, I say all the forces, even in Syria. So it's very difficult to answer your question. I think Staffan is really trying to do his best, Staffan de Mistura. He might try to broker a deal on Aleppo, or if not Aleppo, another city, which could in turn become a symbol and an example for other places in this country. Let's hope that he succeeds, because the suffering, especially, we have to understand that of the population are really incredible and must stop. And the UN is really trying, and the member states all they can, but here also we don't have immediate answers. It will take a little bit of time. Thank you.
Maureen, any thoughts on that issue in a minute?
Okay, on that one I'll be quick, because I think Ambassador, you covered very well what the international community is doing around these, taking trying to get a political process going, as well as the other aspects. But what I would mention here, particularly to this audience, is if you were watching what was happening in Washington this week when there was this summit on countering extremism, is that I think it was the first day anyhow, it wasn't focusing on necessarily what the international community could do together in the region, in Syria, in Iraq. It was talking about what communities could do and are doing and can do to fight and counter violent extremism. And they were talking about, obviously, issues related to community policing. What do you do on social media? And I think that in this case in particular, given what is happening with individuals, particularly from the Middle East, but from elsewhere in the world, going over and joining Daesh, is that this other part of the message, and certainly for people like you as well, is to look at what communities can do around the issue.
Thank you. Now, Maureen, you had been in the U.S. government while the drums were being beaten for the great cause of democratization in the Arab world. The Bush administration, then a kinder, gentler, but still same message, the Obama administration. Somehow people now scratch their heads and ask, what's happened to this idea of people thirsting for democracy? Iraq's politics are in chaos. Egypt is going backwards. Yemen keeps, despite UN mediation, being on the brink of dissolving. Lebanon strained to the point of breakup with the Syrian civil war. Has the United States fundamentally misjudged the appetite for democratic freedoms in the region? Did the Europeans or the Russians or even the Chinese judge it any better?
Thank you very much, Jeff. And this is another question I really liked. I really like this question because, but I'm probably perversely like it because basically I don't think you should look at what does the United say or think or what any other state says or think about democracy in the Arab world. I think you should listen to the Arabs. And in particular, what I like to go back to is the year 2002 when I was the U.S. ambassador in Qatar at the time. And a report was written. It was called, and there's been subsequent reports as well, but in 2002, it was the Arab Human Development Report that came out. And it's a very important report, and it's a very important report even today, 13 years later. It was a report written by Arab experts talking about the deficits that Arabs saw in their own countries and neighborhood. And identified 3 deficits at the time. They included the full respect of human rights and freedoms as the foundation of good governance and human development, the deficit in women's empowerment, and thirdly, the deficit in the acquisition of knowledge and its effective application. Those deficits exist today. And what I think you have to look at I don't call it the Arab Spring, and having thought about it and studied it more recently, I like to think of it as an Arab awakening. And I think we can all ask ourselves, why didn't this awakening happen sooner? And there are Arab experts and historians. They call it the second Arab awakening, and we'd have to go into a whole history lesson. I'm not a historian, and Jeff would probably just give up on me at that point. But no, seriously, going back to this Arab Human Development Report, these are the issues, and I think that the societies in the Arab world, that they are struggling around these issues, both within the societies and the society's relationship to the governments. And I do think that democracy is a process. It's not just about elections, so it's ongoing. And I want to add, just because since I'm talking about a report that is 13 years old, is that I heard an Arab leader say just yesterday that what's it about? What's going to counter Daesh? What should be going on? What did those region have to focus on? He said 3 words. He said education, empowerment, and opportunity. Same basic issues.
Sebastiano, any comment on this issue in a minute?
I really think that I would completely agree. I think that the quest for democracy, the quest for a new empowerment of young people must come first from the region. It's not to us to give any, formulas. It's not to the West. It's not to the European Union. I mean, we can help, of course, by providing some examples. Of course, we have many. We and the U.S., but certainly it has to be a local receipt. And they have to really find all this area has to find the best way to grow into democracy if possible.
I would just observe, Maureen, Arab Spring or Arab Awakening. Jawad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, said that we call it the Islamic Awakening. End quote, end quote. And indeed, that's what seems to have so much of the Western world spooked, that maybe that's what it turned out to be. One last question before we go to our many attentive participants here. Does the political turmoil in so much of the Arab world mean that that mother of all conflicts in the region, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, no longer matters as much? That is it, one of these long-term sores or aches, but it really isn't a central driver? Where do you see that on the landscape of problems in the Middle East today? Either of you.
Very shortly, there is a risk, of course, that all this new crisis emerging in the area, could put this crucial issue in the back seat, which would not be good. I mean, it is paramount to resolve it. A lot of efforts are, devoted every day at the UN, elsewhere in international diplomacy, because it's really important that there is an agreement there. So we must not forget that this is probably one of the central issues we have to face every day.
I agree. I certainly agree with that. And I think that, yes, it is. It's something that is certainly on the agenda here, but that it's also something that I think is being worked out. Sometimes some of the work of diplomacy is done openly in the public discussions, but there's also what goes on behind the scenes. And I think certainly that an issue is that it needs to stay front and center on the agenda.
Thank you, Maureen. Now we will go to our assemblage of 800. And somehow I think you have provoked some levels of interest. So we will take 5 questions. When I call on you, I will ask if you will identify yourself by name and place, where you're from. And keep your questions short. I have the little timer here. I'm going to cut you off after 30 seconds if you meander, and we'll start with Mel Boynton in the front row here. And you guys take notes because...
Thank you for the introduction, Jeff. Yes, I'm Mel Boynton from Southern California. I think some of you may have seen Graham Wood's article in the Current Atlantic. It's this What ISIS Really Wants, and I found the article very sobering. I wonder if any of you have read it, and if you agree with it. I think it's an important article.
Next question, front row here, gentleman who looks overdressed for the youthful set. Your name and whence?
Hi. Hello. All right. My name is Stuart. I'm from the Boulder County chapter. I'm on the board of directors there. In Colorado. Sorry. So my question to whoever wants to answer it is that this is a little bit away from the actual fight itself, but what do you think leaders in the international arena should be doing to better the image of the Arab community and the Islamic community? Because the Secretary General did a good job of addressing the fact that this is a small extremist group. It's not really the Arabs. It's not really an entire religion, but there seems to be a huge stigma around that. So what should leaders be doing to address that and make sure that there isn't any
Got it.
any
Thank you, Stuart.
ostracization?
Gentleman with the tie and the vest sweater. Thank you, Troy.
Thank you. My name is Abu Mor from City College of New York. Something just gingered me like 5 minutes ago when Ambassador Cardi was talking. We're going back to when the Civil War started. I would call it a mild civil war started in Libya, which gingered the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, and that called for a no-fly zone in Syria. And I think Italy played a pivotal role in that. When NATO forces decided to go ahead and enforce the binding resolution from the United Nations Security Council. And my question is, are we better off with Muammar Gaddafi still around or not? Thank you.
All right. The young lady there with the striped arm. I mean, the shirt, the sweater. Louder, Alia, into a microphone, please.
I'm coming. My name is Alia. I'm a UNA member from northern New Jersey, and I had a
Good
question
place.
for the director, Maureen. You've mentioned that it's the responsibility of a country to protect its citizens from genocide and atrocities. In addition, it's the duty of the international community to facilitate the country in upholding their responsibility. So in regards to the killing of the 21 Egyptian Coptics in Libya by ISIS terrorist organization, do you believe that the international community appropriately responded to the atrocity? Thank you.
Checkered hijab.
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Pooja. I'm from Bangladesh, and I'm studying in Adelphi University right now. My question is to the Honorable Maureen Keane. As she stated about UN's inherited enthusiasm to fight atrocities and protect and prevent this globe from heinous activities, what is the current stand of United Nations on the malicious attack that took place in the Gaza Strip during Israeli military assault on the UN facilities, which killed and injured numerous UN personnel and Palestinians? Thus also mentioning that, doesn't Israel, by doing all this, violate the principles enunciated in the UN Charter and number of UN Secretary Council resolutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. All right, so we have 5 questions. Mel Boynton about ISIS or Daesh's, the drivers of Daesh's energy level, if you call it that. Stewart's about what to do to better the image of Islamic community. Abu about are we better off with or without Muammar Gaddafi. Ali is about the killing of the Copts and whether the international community has responded appropriately. And Pooja's little grenade about the attacks on the UN facilities in Gaza. Ambasciatore, do you want to start? 2 minutes.
Yeah, maybe a couple of, not all, because, for example, I didn't read the article. Sorry. Oh, micro. You hear me? What leaders should be doing to better the image of Islamic world? Well, of course, this is an important question, of course, because, in face of what's the message that the Daesh or ISIL is giving to the world. Well, yes, this is, I think, something that should be important in the agenda of all Muslim countries. I mean, to react and they have been doing that, and to say that, of course, this is not what, Islam is about. And I think they are doing that very well, and they should do it maybe more. We should all do it more. Maureen was referring to this meeting today in Washington about terrorist threat. And I think the message that will come out of that is not a religious question. These people have a different agenda. Libya being better without Gaddafi or not, it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, every country has, sometime in its history faces, revolutions, transition periods. We've seen that in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. We've seen that around the world, everywhere, and people get killed. Leaders get killed sometime. It happens, and unfortunately, you have to cope with history. This is history now, and we have to face a new situation, and the Libyans themselves have to face a new situation and find, first of all, as I said, in themselves, the strength and the motivation to have an agreement and to stabilize the country and to prosper again. And the third and maybe last would be, did the international community respond appropriately to the killing of the Coptic people in Libya? Well, this is something that we are very much concerned about. We think, the international community, the Security Council, the UN must respond quickly because the threat of the terrorism is really very, very high, getting very dangerous, and we need to have a strong resolve of the international community. Thank you.
Maureen.
Okay, so I'll try and do my part. I haven't read the Atlantic article on Daesh. It's on my list, but I read another article that I'll mention that I thought was interesting. Is that you have to differentiate Daesh from Al Qaeda, and think about what makes them different. When you think about what your response should be. The article I read, it was thoughtful about how Daesh has taken territory versus Al Qaeda didn't, and how it is about power, but that perhaps you need to have, and I do think that there is an international effort using as many different tools in the different amount of toolbox as possible, but sometimes you have to take the time to identify what the problem is, to think through. Is you have to create the space for that, the action that the international community or the member state or the UN is going to do. And that actually, this making the space for the action so that your action has meaning is actually going to be a thread through, I think, some of my other answers. And it's a hard thing because making that space before you take action, it's very, very hard. Because this kind of things like these killings of the cops, it's outrageous, it's barbaric. The killings of those children in Peshawar late last year, outrageous, barbaric. I could go, we could sit here all afternoon. Sadly, there have been way too many of these incidents. But I think in today's world, and particularly here at the United Nations, and at the states, make some time, give it some space, so that your actions are targeted, are thoughtful, and can have reach the kind of result that you want, to counter the barbarity. So I'm with you on that. You have to move forward on the revolutions, Libya. On the thing about the UN facilities, it's my understanding that there's an ongoing investigation on that one. And then there was has the international community done enough, particularly in response to the cops? And I think it's the international community is looking for those right steps to take. Some steps have been taken, others will be. And I think sometimes you have to say, okay, let's make the space to think through about what is the right action in this situation.
Thank you, Maureen. Second round of questions. Anybody from the upper deck? Yes, gentlemen at the second row. Yes, the back row against the wall. I mean, have a little bit louder. You say Edward?
My name is Edward. I'm sorry. My name is Edward. I'm from Drexel University chapter, Philadelphia. So thank you for all the information regarding the Arab Spring and also the ISIS issues. But I do have a question. My question is, so recently there are some think tanks and also the public side, like the ISIS or ISIL, is actually a little bit different from the traditional concept on terrorism. So they're more like a country. So in this case, the international society maybe should use a different strategy to dealing with them. So what do you think of this, and what kind of strategy?
Thank you, Edward. And right in front of you, there was another hand raised.
My name's Tony Korek, and I'm from Long Island, Suffolk County. And my question is regarding the responsibility to protect. I'm so fascinated by this, and I'm glad to hear you say, Ambassador Quinn, that it's not dead. Gareth Evans, in a book on the topic, wrote that R2P is supposed to be proactive and not only reactive, not just reacting to violence that is occurring, but also be proactive in looking for signs when things are going along that way. And I was wondering to what degree the United Nations does act in that way. And this morning, Secretary Ban Ki-moon mentioned that we need to look for the root causes of some of these problems. And do we do that? Do we, as an organization, how much is that a part of our effort? Thank you.
This category here, gentlemen in the red tie. Yeah. Can't hear you.
Thank you so much for giving me this audience. My name is Dare Akonde, and I'm the Director of Advocacy for UNA Chicago chapter. I was here last year, and I asked the panelists some questions about Boko Haram in Nigeria, and I requested for the UN body language towards curbing this terrorist organization. So for the past year, we all know that Boko Haram has gripped the northeastern Nigeria with relentless campaign of brutality. So thousands of people have been killed, displaced, even in January this year, Washington Post responded that over 20,000 people are internally displaced in that region of the country. And as a result...
Dare, your question?
Okay. My question is, in terms of refugee efforts and trying to resettle those people that have been displaced, what are we currently doing as United Nations in that region?
Okay, and then in this area, gentleman here with the kind of grayish suit, and tie, whatever, yes.
Okay, so I'm Jacob Simpson from the Seton Hall University chapter, and as ISIS or Daesh is gaining many of the members from Western countries, especially from the United States, Britain, and Europe, how do you say we could best combat that? Even no-fly zones have not worked. Many are arriving by boat. How do you say we can stop these people from going in?
Over on this side, yes, the young lady with the multicolored blouse. No, you need a microphone.
Here.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Condi, and I'm from the High School for Language and Diplomacy here in New York. And my question is, considering the changes in today's political conjectures, is the option of working with Assad to face ISIS on the table, and how realistic would it be? Thank you.
Question. So we have our second round, 5 questions before us. Edward of Philadelphia, which I think picks up on something, Maureen, that you had said before, that ISIL or Daesh is different from traditional terrorism, more like a country. Tony Korrick from Long Island on responsibility to protect. Dare Koje from Chicago, dealing with refugees in Boko Haram. Jacob Simpson from Seton Hall on foreign fighters and controlling their flow. And then Michelle from the New York High School on Languages, working with Assad to deal with Daesh. So, Maureen, Sebastiano, no, ladies first on this one.
Okay, and I'm going to try and I'm going to try and be to the point. Okay, so on Daesh, yes, it has taken land. So perhaps maybe one strategy should it be a strategy just try and as in one expert described it to me, it's contain them, encircle them, and let them rot. I'll just leave it like that. Try and be quick. On responsibility to protect, yes, and being proactive. Yes, the UN is being proactive, and I certainly think that you mentioned, Ambassador, one of those efforts. But I think that there is a constant effort to improve what the United Nations can do in the prevention area. The Deputy Secretary General was just talking at the International Peace Institute yesterday, again, about this what can you do to prevent conflict, to prevent atrocities, and we're talking specifically in that case about mediation and mediation around natural resources. So yes, you can be proactive. On Boko Haram, I think that certainly the UN has a regional envoy as well in West Africa, working as well with the governments there. So I would say, yes, there's active efforts there. On deterring people from joining Daesh, I think you have to look at and work against both the push factors and the pull factors. So what's the attraction? In some cases, the story is, it's adventure, opportunity to be somebody. But you have to also work on the push factors at home in countries where there's social exclusion. Look for that creating the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And then Assad is, he's Stefan de Mistura, the negotiator, is going back and forth with Assad on that issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maureen. Sebastiano, last word.
Last word. Thank you. In Italian? No.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
No.
Anybody speaking Italian here? No.
Yes.
It's a pity.
We have somebody here
from
Rome,
good. Excellent. So ISIS, characteristic of a country, is exactly what we have to avoid. They want that. They want to be seen as a state actor, as a legitimate, interlocutor. This is why they're using this media communication tool so well. And this is very dangerous. So we have to avoid at all costs, and they are just, taking ground for the moment, but certainly they are not, they don't have the characteristics of a country. R2P, again, I just mentioned before, I think there must be a shift between reaction, which is in a way what the Council does when there is a crisis, sends peacekeepers, to action, which is prevention and mediation. And this is one of the challenges we are facing at the UN today on the 70th anniversary. Boko Haram, I don't know, because, you're talking about the UN addressing this place. I really don't know about that. Foreign fighters, this is one of the big issues. The Security Council, of course, the UN has dealt with that in September. There is a resolution. Everybody must comply with it. All the countries are taking, especially European Union. We have in Italy, for example, we know about 85 foreign fighters coming from Italy, many more from France or Germany or UK, I think. It's a lot of national problem to avoid the spread of terrorist and extremist propaganda in our countries, in Europe and elsewhere, and we have to deal with that. There is a lot of intelligence cooperation going on, and we have to step up our efforts. Assad, I don't think it could be at the table.
Well, since we are 1 minute ahead of 4:30, one last quick question to Sebastiano. No, my question to Sebastiano. When is Italy running for the Security Council again?
We are running right now. Right now. We are a candidate for 2017-18, so we hope to be able. Italy is a country that has a lot of interest in the Mediterranean, Africa, and so on.